everybody wide awake. Welcome to the, I guess, the third day of the festival and the best panel. So my name is Michael Foster. I'm a professor of Japanese at UC Davis, and I research Japanese monsters. I'm just going to be the moderator today, but I get the privilege of introducing our four panelists today for panel H2. Monsters, Technology, and Precarious Humanity. Each one will present for about 15 minutes. We'll take questions at the end, and I'll just introduce one after the other. But keep your questions in mind and look forward to an excellent session. Our first speaker is Yasheng Shi, Conjuring Precarity Through the Sublime Bodies of Japanese Giant Monsters. Yasheng Shi is a PhD candidate at the Film and Digital Media Department with a, I guess, UC Santa Cruz, okay, with a designated emphasis on computational media. Yasheng has published several articles and chapters in peer-reviewed journals and edited collections from the lens of post-war Japan, globalized media, gender, and race.
Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, and thank you to the organizers. This has been really great to be a place to talk about monsters, and and that being like a subject itself is really exciting. So for my talk today is a part of my ongoing dissertation. I look at several Japanese media in the 1990s to the present day, which all work through femininity and monstrosity in some ways. What was interesting to me was this figure of a giant woman who would appear at the end of the world. What becomes clear is that femininity is used as a metaphor in these stories, and gender becomes a cipher for understanding Japan's post-war modernity, anchored by gendered understanding of power, apocalypse, and desire. Each chapter of my dissertation uses gender as a primary tool of analysis while weaving in cultural and historical context of the post-war Japan to demonstrate how each media and medium captures elements of anxiety, ambivalence, hope, and fear towards present and future precarity. Given the duration of my talk today, I'll primarily focus on one chapter, but I will foreground some of the analytic framework. First, I want to talk about the sublime. The sublime is rooted in aesthetics and literary studies, describing experiences in which conventional understanding ceases. Philip Shaw links sublimity to the moment when one's ability to apprehend, to know, and to express a thought is defeated. This defeat allows the mind to experience what lies beyond thought and language. And transformation takes place here where the subject is overwhelmed by the sense of a lack, feeling small, that is also an expansion, desire to overcome. Thus, the sublime can be transcendental, which is a prominent aspect in the romantic conceptions of the sublime. In short, early conceptions of the sublime describe the experience of encountering something overwhelming, yet transcendental if one can overcome it. The beholder of the work itself experiences sublime vicariously through the painted subject. The sublime, therefore, is most potent when it's temporary and to a spectator who finds it allegorical. And I want to highlight the subject's masculine coding because we'll see that a lot in a little bit. Jacques Lacan's sublime is so different from the traditional sublime that is often omitted when scholars, theorists, and artists are talking about it. I want to bring it up here because he also addressed the same sense of lack or feelings of small or incomplete that is signaled by the romantic sublime. To avoid a very convoluted and system-heavy breakdown of a psychoanalytic work, I will focus on the sublime object. A sublime object helps us to form identity in a negative model, where we feel realized by identifying, capturing, and consuming something that we can think can cure our sense of lack. But just like drinking Coke cannot make you feel how the poster makes you feel, the sublime object is often an empty signifier that we chase after, thinking it could make us more realized and fulfilled individual. It's like a false promise, basically. The sublime is also political. This is an image often associated with atomic bombs, and this mushroom cloud over Hiroshima is iconic in shaping our understanding of nuclear power. This is built on the romantic traditions of sublime, where powerful images of destruction overwhelm our senses and urge us to come up with our own understanding about the past, nationhood, and identity. By looking at this image, you are allowed to come up with your own understanding of the repercussion of violence. As Shaw beautifully puts it, that the sublime can lay siege to the institutionalized form of quiescence and passivity that turns events into impregnable monuments. It's not just a mushroom cloud that can evoke the sublime, but ruins and debris. This is the blasted skeleton of the building in Hiroshima, and it has been kept in this condition until this day, as a melancholic and unmetabolized reminder of what happened in 1945. So how does these cultural memories of Japan impact popular culture and translate into media that reflect Japan's post-war as well as post-war condition? I want to highlight that I've been showing you images that conjures the sublime, and I want you to think about in the fetishistic nature. And by fetishistic, I mean a psychoanalytic way, as a denial of lack. These images are here to address something that is missing in us, missing from history, and signaling something that refuses to be represented. It would be wild for me to not mention Godzilla, who is the purest example of the sublime monster, whose image is highly fetishized both in a psychoanalytic way and as a commodity. The giant monster breathed nuclear beams and almost exclusively terrorized Japan. Scholars Yoshikuni Igarashi focused on Godzilla to trace the wartime memory that haunted post-war Japan because there was a popular narrative that took hold after the atomic bombing. This is known as a foundational narrative, where the bombs are not only inevitable but necessary to bring about a new Japan that is modernized and prosperous. This sentiment is a little messed up, to say the least, and there's nothing more subversive than a monster who literally tramples the post-war recovery. Godzilla is a sublime giant who touches on different layers of sublime and helps to popularize the genre of monsters known as kaiju, or the cosmic giants. Another giant figure are the giant robots that usually combat these cosmic horrors. They are known as mechs. And while they're often piloted by teenagers or young adults, they are powered by special energy, sometimes a metaphor for nuclear energy. With all the background out of the way, I want to use the rest of the time to talk about this animated series called the Neon Genesis Evangelion, which is EVA. In this series, we'll see kaijus, mechs, and finally a planet-sized woman who would appear at the end of the world. Set in the post-apocalyptic Japan, EVA is a story about a group of people struggling to prevent an apocalyptic event known as Third Impact, and eventually come to terms with it, with different sentiment and rationale depending on the iteration of the story. The story has many layers, and in the fictional timeline, the world has been destroyed once by an event called the Second Impact, where a giant explosion in Antarctic instigated environmental and societal problems that wiped out half of humanity. The Second Impact is an allegory of atomic bombs. The main characters are living in a perpetually post-apocalyptic or apocalyptic world where they're facing new dangers in the form of cosmic beings known as angels. The major conflict of the show, especially the first half of the runtime, follow the Monster Week format, where giant mechs known as Evangelions fight world-ending kaijus known as angels. So you have this interesting dynamic between angels and world-ending monsters, and Evangelions, which are built to fight against angels, also manufactured using the same materials, harvest from the angel. So you have this very interesting nuclear discourse already being established here. The setting offers a serial temporality where giant monsters would invade, but as a teenager, you still need to go to school. The mundane setting is paired with the sense of imminent danger, that the precarity and conflict feels banal. So the surreal depiction is not really that weird when you read against the backdrop of the 1990s. Before the 90s, post-war Japan has enjoyed a miraculous recovery that a dead phoenix has risen to become economic, technological, and to a certain degree cultural giant. But the end of the bubble economy, job insecurity, isolation created by late capitalism, and environmental concern had destabilized the myth about Japan. This destabilization is evident in stories that also reflect the shifting definition of masculinity as a default subjectivity. And we can't have a story about growing up with a mother without talking about mothers. So let's focus on the mothers in the story. First, we have Misato, who is arguably the second protagonist of the story. She witnessed a second impact, which was caused by a failed experiment carried out by her father, and she became the commander of the teenage pilots. Misato takes Shinji in to help him find confidence and a sense of community, yet she's ambivalent about conscripting teenagers and turning them into monster-fighting killers. Misato embodies a post-war Japan where she must reinvent herself from the crimes and shortcomings of the forefather. Shinji, in turn, who's the protagonist, represents a post-war Japan as he struggles against the impossible expectations of the prosperity myth, which is doomed to fail. Misato becomes this complicated mother figure where she's simultaneously an object of desire and also an unwillingly manipulative figure who gives Shinji a community by conscripting him into a child soldier. She is aware that she's taking the place of the sublime object for Shinji, where she reminds Shinji what is lacking in his life. And of course, she is conflicted about her role in that. And next, let's talk about the mechs. As you can see, there's a purple mech over there. That's the protagonist Shinji pilots. It's named Unit 1. Unit 1 is very much visually coded as masculine, especially how the armor plate looks. Despite the masculine visuality, Unit 1 is also feminine. Even before the big reveal, characters in the series often compare Unit 1's difficulty to control to a woman's emotions, because that's really difficult to control. It is later revealed that the body of Unit 1 is manufactured using the mother of angels, this mythical being called Lilith, and Shinji's mother, Yui, actually fused herself with Unit 1, which allows Shinji to pilot the machine. The visual language of the pilot cockpit, as you can see, is about to be inserted into the nape of the mech, is both a phallic metaphor for control and a womb because the pilot can breathe through an embryonic fluid-like substance, just like a fetus would in the uterus. Eva's body is another metaphor of a nuclear power, which, according to the director, is made to concern to him because of the Cold War. So purple armor plate are not really defensive, but they're really like control rods in the nuclear power plant that seeks to tame the untamable power. The giant robots are walking nuclear power plants, which is also very much characterized post-war Japan. Japan even today ranks 4th in the world in terms of operational nuclear power plant, which is odd considering what happened in 1945. But you can see the sublime is really being invoked here, that there is an attempt to tame the untamable, and the body of the mech is a site where contradicting feelings such as awe, control, and fear can be conjured. So even the nuclear discourse is gendered, where raw power is feminine and control is masculine. This is most evident in the mythical figure of the story, very Lovecraftian-esque cosmic horror way. Angels and humans are offsprings of ancient aliens, and one of them is called Lilith. Here, Lilith is a mythical mother to mankind. She represents the origin of humanity and is the purest expression of power. As you can see here, she's being pinned by a phallic-shaped weapon that renders her dormant, and her body is harvested to make science project, which includes mechs. The other plot of Evangelion centers around this thing called Human Instrumentality Project, which is a project that seeks to melt all humans back into one entity to eradicate the kind of theme of isolation by melting away the lines between self and other. And to do that, Lilith must be conjured. This vendetta against isolation will make sense where considered post-war Japan, where isolation and arrest development are the major concerns. With the economic downturn, late capitalism, and job insecurity, you have isolation in terms of Marxist alienation theory, but also the great Hanshin earthquake in Kobe and the Tokyo subway siren attack, which is a result of doomsday cult that seeks to precipitate the end of the world, also add to the precarity in the 1990s. So it's not surprised to see that the mythical mother figure is being featured as a salvation to isolation, that the figure is who we can turn to and then when there's no other solution left in the world. She is sublime as she exists outside our understanding of the world, and we can pray to her and rely on her because she has reached the limits of, she represents what is beyond our understanding. I'm going to go a little faster. So another interesting character is Ayano Mile. She is a clone that's made in the image of Shinji's mother, but but she has a soul and body of Lilith. She, like all the other feminine characters, serves as a foil to the male protagonist. But interestingly, she also serves as a foil to almost every other character in the series. She is a floating and shifting signifier of lack to most of the characters in the series, and a reminder of what is lacking in them. There's more to say about her as object desire in anime fandom culture, but I will leave that for another time. As a sublime object, by the end of the story, Rei shapeshifts into people's fear and desire and break them into goop. That's like the whole point. Her as a sublime object also embodies a romantic sublime when she finally takes the form of a giant woman. In the final moments of the movie, theatrical remake of the last 2 episodes, we see her becoming this figure towering over Earth, merging all souls into one. The world is simultaneously destroyed and remade. It is in this body we can locate all registers of the sublime. As compelling as she can be, what she tells me is how we understand civilization, modernity, precarity, and apocalypse is gendered. And in front of the sublime image is still a masculine subject who must decide about his relationship to the world around him. The giant woman will become a motif. You can find her in video games like Drakengard. You can find her positively featured in movies like Paprika. And again, an unwilling villain in video games like Death Stranding. I want to situate the giant woman as a cipher for post-war Japan, a popular media as a visual culture that represents, reproduce, and shape our ideas, especially as commodities. And I also talk about how femininity becomes this all-encompassing metaphor for the other, which highlights itself as masculine, textured by patriarchal understanding of power, maturity, and identity. How we understand precarity and apocalypse is from the point of view of masculine positionality. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Yashang. And sure. And our next speaker, who is currently swapping out the computer, is Brandon Callender. In Space, No One, the case for Black life in the expanded Alien versus Predator universe. Brandon Callender is an assistant professor of English at Brandeis University, where he teaches Black queer literatures and horror studies, including classes on Blackness and horror, the ghosts of race, and vampires, dark fictions of blood. He's completing his monograph, The Charge of the Other in Black Gay Men's Literatures. And you ready?
Thank you so much.
Brandon.
All right. Grateful to be here, glad to be here. I'm going to go quick.
You guys are doing fine with time.
Okay, beautiful. The guidebook for the Alien role-playing game instructs game masters to imbue the cosmos with a sense of wonder, but also to make it a harsh place that is indifferent to humanity. The word indifference tracks back to what H.P. Lovecraft, a direct influence on Alien, describes as cosmic indifference, a profound sense of dread, this means I'm quoting, of contact with unknown spheres and powers, a subtle, awed listening as if for the beatings of black wings or the scratchings of outside shapes and entities on the known universe's utmost rim. Those black wings are for me the scratchings of race in the Alien and Predator franchise, and my talk wants us to hear it. Earth in the Alien novelizations is described as, that's the game, is described as a place alive with happy people, blissfully ignorant of the stark reality that was an indifferent cosmos. But when Black horror faces the cosmos, its indifference is nothing compared to the known horrors of Earth. A fear of cosmic indifference suddenly seemed comical or downright naive, Victor Lavelle writes, addressing the earthly plight of Black people in the Ballad of Black Tom. Similarly, in V. Castro's novels Aliens, Vasquez, it is not the alien who regards her Latina heroine with cruel indifference, but a cop whose eyes, she writes, stared back at her with a coldness of the merciless elements of space. The alien cosmos, it seems, should frighten us less than our own inhumane world. Lovecraft may intend for the cosmos to be indifferent, but writers of color, like Brandon O'Brien, turn to the cosmos as space to be, as he puts it, for Blackness to be seen as radically significant. I'm never myself too interested in seeing the cosmos of horror become a welcoming vision for any traveler. Rather than rooting for Black final girls and boys conquering final frontiers, I await instead my Blackness in that alien cosmos that is radically inhospitable to humans terraforming it, making it over in their image. When I watch Alien and Predator, I'm not looking for images of Black people becoming somebody out there in space. I'm looking for ways to connect with the Blackness of the alien, the Predator, and that still Blacker space from which they come, the cosmos that makes colonists regret they ever ventured out into it. This desire to see if intelligent images of Black life exist out there in the universes of Alien and Predator too often becomes a search for empowering images of Black survival. Danny Glover gives his decision to serve as a protagonist in an otherwise deeply xenophobic film, Predator 2, by stating, "I've never seen a movie with an African American who fights an alien and comes out alive and becomes the hero." In my riff on the tagline from Alien in Space, No One Can Hear You Scream, I am thinking of what it means to value Black life, not only from the vantage point of the human, but the racialized aliens whose right to exist may challenge our own. And my aim is to show in this monster battle a clash of racial signifiers for Black life, the alien and Predator, with alien most capturing, for me, the inability of Blackness to matter in the cosmos. And I'll begin with Alien versus Predator, because it's the site where most Black fans find significance. The Alien vs. Predator film stages a vision of alliance between Predator and the Black heroine Lex that the top scholars of Black horror and Afrofuturism see as offering Black fans a vision of cosmic significance. In the scene that most interests them, Predator, a cold-blooded intergalactic hunter species, teams up with a Black woman to fight the alien xenomorphs and their queen. Not only does she receive a weapon for a trophy for her efforts, aligning her with a Black male antagonist of Predator 2, but she is honorifically marked by the Predator when she saves him from an alien. In horror noir, Robin R. Means Coleman celebrates this moment when Predator, in her words, brands her with its tribal insignia, as centering Black women as a warrior hero in a macho franchise. The scene of a Black woman being branded by another race is not legible in the semiotics of slavery, but is an act that recognizes her as a fellow warrior. As the novelization says, for a brief moment, human and humanoid stood facing one another in the vast polar expanse, sharing a ritual that was already ancient when mankind was still living in caves. The ritual not only ties Lex to ancient rites, but to final girls before her, like the heroine Machiko Noguchi, a mixed-race Japanese woman marked by Predator. In the recent story Isla Montazas by Steve Perry, he writes of the African warrior woman whose tribal markings mirror those of Predator. After fighting enslavers and aliens alike, his protagonist is also gifted a spear by Predator, highlighting their shared scars as well. These cross-cultural moments not only afford marginalized groups a sense of recognition and belonging by Predator, the species, but by the larger franchise. Today, they become tools of rebranding that tries to create more positive imagery of cultural difference from a franchise that is trafficked in xenophobic representations. Where Alien rarely mentions racial difference, Predator relies on it as a key component of storytelling. Predator singles out warriors from a variety of cultural contexts. Well before the recent film Prey, Predator hunted and was defeated by scores of indigenous characters, fugitive slaves, all Black army regiments, and various groups of African warriors. Predator also drops into scenes of racial conflict, as with the 1993 comic Race War, forcing different races to close ranks and battle Predator as the ultimate racial others. While humans of different races ultimately side with one another to face the Predator, making this a drama of racial alliance. In Alien versus Predator, people team up with the humanized Predator as a lesser evil. But what does it mean for Black characters to gain recognition battling against or alongside a character that is premised upon phobias regarding Blackness? This creature, described in the 2018 film The Predator as being like an alien Whoopi Goldberg, was based upon an image of the Rastafarian warrior, who the famed creature effects designer Stan Winston calls a great starting concept for the Predator. I started drawing and designing this alien character with quills that in silhouette would look like dreadlocks. While Danny Glover sees his role in the second film as advancing images of Black people, his role as a police lieutenant gunning down coke-snorting Colombians and Jamaican gangs is harder to overlook. When confronting the Jamaican voodoo gang lord King Willie, the film complicates the positive identification that Black viewers find in Glover's character. Right before King Willie is slain by Predator, Glover's character confronts him in an alley, affording Willie a chance to speak. The spirit world, man, he gonna take us all, always the same. You can't see the eyes of the demon till you come calling. I feel them all around. This be the dread, man, real dread. By saying this is the dread, the Rastafarian redirects the terror ascribed to his own body to the Predator who stalks him. The comic adaptation of the film visually puns on these mirroring images by illustrating the Rasta from behind in one image and then the Predator from the front in the next. The two stand as complementary portraits. Working back to front, the drawings unmask with a wink the resemblance between these two predators, laying bare their dreadful symmetry. The comic adds a moment that is not in the film. Our Black lieutenant says, "Let's see what you look like under that mask." And when he lifts it, the Predator says back, "This is the Dreadman," as if, like a Russian doll, unmasking the Predator simply laid bare another Rasta. But what is the dread for the Black lieutenant in this moment? Though Predator speaks, we see his horrified reception at hearing the words of the bad Black immigrant coming out of the Predator's body. The dread, I wonder, might be the recognition that what he is fighting is his own diasporic reflection. The novelization adds another take that is neither in the film nor the comic, when Predator held the skull up, almost reverently examining it from all angles, as if it were a precious art object. With its other hand, it picked up the scalp dreadlocks and fingered them admiringly. Given their resemblance to one another, I wonder if the Predator can fondle the locks without seeing anything of himself in them. Given this history, I wonder what Lex sees of herself in her alliance with the Predator in this crossover film. It is only because of the greater threat, the alien, that she humanizes the Predator. When she sees its face beneath the mask, she does not deliver the famous lines from the franchise, "You are one ugly motherfucker," but instead reserves these words for the alien. And yet, is there not also within the plight of the alien, the xenomorph, something that speaks to the black condition? When Lex first comes to Antarctica for the expedition, she reminisces of a space free of corporate control. Shackleton called Antarctica the last great journey left to man. It's the one place left in the world that no one owns that's completely free. But the idea of this land as completely free is ironized by the fact that predators have long ago shackled the black alien queen below its surface. The entity that is chained, carried over on the hold of a ship, experimented upon, and exported throughout the series and forced to breed for the sport of the other is alien. If it cannot be harnessed, it must be wiped out. Of course, it's a losing bet to side with the alien. The xenomorph remains an impossible site of identification and alliance. Because it fatally gestates inside other organisms, for a human to side with the alien is suicide. Because it is so aggressively sexualized, it is as if only a rapist would wish for it to live. And still, I cannot cheer the final girl when she destroys it. I recoil at the queer poet Evan J. Peterson's ironic cheer for Ripley in the 1979 film as she executes this phallic threat. Open the airlock, Ripley. Breathe umbilically and tell that slick black cock face to go suck an egg, he writes. Though the back of the book calls me to side with the final girl, one poet calls the final girls together to take back the darkness. I cannot help seeing my own slick black face in that darkness. I think of the queer Chicana thinker Gloria Anzaldúa, who asks of this creature born from the body of those it destroys, what if I loved the alien, looked it in the face and said, yes, you are a part of me, I cannot deny you, I cannot turn my back on you. Where fan discourse rails against seeing race with an alien as mere projection, such projections in fact originate not with us, but with white monster makers who design Alien with blackness on the mind. The esteemed monster maker of Alien, H.R. Giger, recalls being handed a photo from Leni Riefenstahl's Last of the Nuba, which helped inspire the form of the alien. Giger says, Ridley Scott contributed a photo of a Nubian, those tall black people. He said it might be good to use their physical look, covered with a sort of transparent clothes so you could see the skin. Ridley Scott assured me, and there's Balaji Badeo, the actor who plays Alien, assured me he would fulfill all my wishes and get me all the help needed to turn this black man into a perfect monster. For this creation, I see Giger in his workshop, all trussed in black, perfecting his monster from truckloads of pipes, bones, animal guts, torn-up condoms, KY jelly. I see Giger pausing to admire, like Predator, the 3 human skulls that he has had shipped to him from India before hacking off its jaw and fitting the skull to the alien. In a practice common for British and American horror films, it was cheaper to use real bones of Indians than to make fake ones. When Anzaldúa says the alien is a part of me, I wonder if she is thinking of these parts, these Indian bones or those features lifted from black bodies, or how the Alien sequel is really all about Vietnam. In his journal, Giger rants about the alterations made to his perfect monster. He is upset at the loss of its translucent skin and of changes made to its expression. The way he changed the face and fashioned the lips made it look like an ape, he writes, before weeks later venting at what he refers to as its awful African lips. Is Giger trying to turn a black man into a perfect monster, or a monster into a perfect black man? This is the dread, the profound sense of dread of not knowing whether it is my body that is being dreaded or desired, at having my claim to see my race reflected in this monster disqualified as mere projections, when these projections of race into the monster were never even mine to begin with. It is not, after all, the body of the alien that our final girl, Sigourney Weaver, calls otherworldly, but that of the black actor playing him. Balaji looked like he came from another universe anyway, she says. I know some of y'all want me to cheer the triumph of the white final girl, but I can't help but hear again the beating of black wings, the missing elements of race from this discussion. I hear Sigourney Weaver describing the cosmic dread of space in a language that can only see humanity as white. It was so striking to think of these pink creatures, very vulnerable creatures, moving through this harsh metallic environment, she says. There is this idea of filming as much space as possible within this environment to show what a human being was in space. Even while there is a black crew member aboard this metal craft, she can only think of humans as pink, leaving darkness to the space and to the alien that makes her experience at last sit within the margins some of us call home. As Anzaldúa writes, my sympathies were not with the people at all, they were with the alien. When Anzaldúa accepts the alien, I see her as being ordained in that perverse church that exists throughout the extended Alien franchise, the Church of Immaculate Incubation, who are perverse because they affirm the right of the alien to live in a cosmos in which they should perish. In the Alien 1992 comic Tribes, such cults cry out, "Protect and proliferate, that is the need of the swarm." I sometimes wonder if I myself would not take up this decree as a prayer for deeper shades of black villainy than we currently see on screen. What if I see myself in the monster and it is all your fault? What if, like Lavelle's Black Tom, I were to say, I take Cthulhu over you devils any day? I think of the mad scientist in the Alien comic who worships not the soft pink form of the human, but the black body of the alien that pink humanity would not let live. Though to embrace that monster, that part of me I cannot deny would be a suicide, he declares, the pink poetry of man will be subsumed by the black genius of the alien, and the result will be the original and final creature. It will feed and live off itself, and I will join it. Though it may be for me an end, I join him in these lines because maybe, after having consumed so much of myself in your nightmares, it is time that I start, like the black queer poet Justin Philip Reed, thinking like an alien. There, at the utmost rim of everything that I have known, I would introduce myself to it with one final gasp of poetry. I'm nobody. Who are you?
Thank you. And our next speaker is Ryan Fay. His talk is entitled Misogyny in Monsters and Machine Learning from ELSA to M3GAN, if I said that right, and beyond. Ryan Fay is an education consultant with experience teaching high school and college. He is currently the editor-in-chief at Enfrightened Press, which is focused on publishing accessible horror academia.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today. I just wanted to take a second to thank our hosts at UCSC, Dr. Chemers and Dr. Fox, for putting this on. This weekend has been incredibly reinvigorating. I've been studying social issues in horror movies for the last 10 and a half years at this point. First time I presented my work was a paper called Social Horrors. It was my senior thesis, and I presented at the National Conference on Undergraduate Research. After I had presented my paper, the moderator of the session had come up to me and said, "Where do you teach?" I said, "Sir, I'm an undergrad." My mother is an English teacher, so I guess you could say it runs in the family. But in 2013, when I graduated, she said, "Why don't you take the MTELs, the Massachusetts Teaching Licensure Tests?" I said, "No, I don't want to be a teacher." She said, "I'll pay for it." So I passed the test. I started teaching college in 2019 and high school in September of 2020. As we all know, September of 2020 was a great time to start a career like that. Couldn't be more fun. I ended up leaving education in June of this year because I felt like I was failing. I couldn't find a way to get these kids to care about learning. I'm still obsessed with how do we learn? And we have this new emerging field of AI, and there's this new, I read about this DALL-E 3 today. And the worst thing is happening to this. All of these AI artists, or self-proclaimed artists, are very afraid of one thing: legislation. Anyway, let's get to the fun stuff. So earlier this year, I became obsessed with The Bride of Frankenstein. What I find fascinating about it is the bride is only in the movie for 3 minutes and 56 seconds at the very end of the movie. She's one of the most iconic of the Universal classic monsters, but she's usually left out. It's probably because she gets so little time. Now, I include this picture of Elsa Lanchester because she plays both Mary Shelley in the very beginning of the movie and the bride herself. The whole story in the beginning is about Mary Shelley presenting a continuation of James Whale's initial Frankenstein, which he did not want to do a sequel to. He wanted to let that be that, but the studio kept coming back to him, and he was ultimately convinced by one thing: money. Now, I just want to point out about this image here of the bride, the only thing that we see that's wrong with her face is these scars along her jawline, as opposed to the possibly male counterpart. I say possibly male because at some point, well, at no point really, is that creature, that the monster, referred to as male. It's always about, it's alive! It's alive! And they all refer to the monster as it. And throughout this movie, I have paid so much attention to the most horrible scourge of the internet right now, if you've been on Twitter at all. The worst thing you can do is understand pronouns. Frankenstein's monster, and yes, it is Frankenstein's monster, not Frankenstein's creature. That's a whole debate for another day. Only ever referred to as it. The bride does get pronouns. She is referred to by she, her pronouns. And what I think is fascinating about the dichotomy here between men and women is this image here of Mary Shelley, again, played by Elsa Lanchester. And we see her in this image on the left here. She had just been doing some light sewing, some knitting, some cross-stitch, whatever she's doing. And Lord Byron, the gentleman on the right, whose face is much too close, holding her hand much too close to his own chest, came over, grabbed her hands as she was doing her thing, and that's what causes her to prick her fingers. If she was left alone, she would have been fine. But he interferes, he grabs her, and then we see on the other side, we see her husband, Percy, is comforting that injured hand from arm's length. And then as the story progresses, Mary is given the time, but not necessarily the space, to tell the story of how she wanted Whale's adaptation of Frankenstein to end. Now, this is all fabricated. Shelley, in her original novel, does not really mention any of this. This is all Whale's speculation. And we see Shelley here is sandwiched between these two men. Their hips, Lord Byron's very prominent, high-waisted pants, almost as comforting. And we kind of see that echoed here on that picture on the right. As we see the bride is revealed for the first time, we see that she's given this amazing dress, this nice shock wig that we all recognize. Again, sandwiched between two men, between Dr. Frankenstein and the monster. And if you'll notice, Dr. Frankenstein, his hands are a little more aggressive. He's kind of the Lord Byron character, whereas the monster plays that Percy role, plays more the husband, the gentler touch. Now, what I find interesting is that when the monster goes for that first touch on the arm, he's very gentle, and he goes to hold her hand very gently. And she responds with a big hiss, and she's so aggressive. But what I find most interesting about this is that her brain was grown synthetically in a lab by Frankenstein's mentor, his former professor, Dr. Pretorius. He grew this brain in a lab, all by itself, did not want any past life experience to influence her, so that she could be molded into the perfect bride. A bride for a monster. A bride that would be used to procreate and breed a new world of dead, unalive, undead children. A twisted version of Adam and Eve. The one thing that they can't control, the one thing that they struggle to really figure out, and it's left to Henry Frankenstein here. For some reason, not Victor, but Henry. Bothers me to no end. But Henry can't figure out how to keep the heart alive. Everything is figured out, but the last piece is the heart. And the heart that they had was too old, it was no good, it wasn't fresh. They go and get this new heart, they send out one of the goons. Igor dies in the first movie. So they get these hired goons, these murderers, to go out, find a new heart. They say, go down to the lab, find someone who's died recently in an accident, a young woman. There's a huge emphasis on female youth in putting together the bride. And what happens is they murder a young woman on the street. They come back with her heart. Frankenstein's a little suspicious of it, but he's got work to do. But as he's working on the heart to get it to continue, we hear boom, 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 for minutes. And it gets annoying. The telltale heart is so annoying in this scene, but it's so dramatic and so tense. The point between the synthetic brain with nothing in it and that telltale heart is that we see a clear display of emotional intelligence from the bride. But the other thing I find interesting about it, and perhaps hypocritical about it, is we see the difference in touch here and what is presented as comforting and what is not. Throughout the movie, we've seen the male touch as very comforting to women who have been distraught. We see early on that Henry's fiancée Elizabeth is only comforted by his touch, that her touch brings him to life. We also see that she delivers the moral of the story very early on. And as she's presented as rational initially, she starts to get worked up by the figure of death that she sees looming over Henry. That if he continues with his work, that he might end up dead because of it. And he gives her this touch, this hug, strokes her arms, embraces her, and she's comforted by him. Now we see a similar thing from the monster here, that he's giving that similar touch, trying to be comforting, and she hisses at him. And she goes to Henry for comfort. And we see Henry's touch here is so aggressive. He's grabbing her arm. He's got a hand around her rib cage. Not very comforting, but it is presented as such. Now, thank God we never had a mistake like that again. Or maybe we did. But, you know, it was the 80s. Who wasn't doing one of these teenage boy hypersexuality exploitation films? But thank God we only had one, right? Oh no. It's Wes Craven's very little talked about Deadly Friend, where the high school girlfriend of this kid ends up dying. He goes into the morgue, steals her, puts a chip in her brain, and she becomes this bride-like figure if the bride was a little more violent. But thank God we didn't do that again. I mean, it's not like comedy comes in threes, right? I'll let Frankenhooker speak for itself. But I want to move on to a more modern-day Frankenstein. We're not cobbling together dead bodies. We're moving forward into an era of artificial intelligence. That is the way that we are going toward the future. So we have the Model 3 generative android, or Megan. But this doesn't really look like Megan, right? So we need more of a face to it. Okay, that's still a little off-putting, but we're getting closer. That's Megan. That's the Megan we all know. What still disturbs me about this is that this is presented to be a 4-foot-tall little girl, a companion for children, and yet she is airbrushed with a lot of makeup. So Megan, as an android, has internet access built into her brain. And what concerns me about that is we never really know what she's accessing. We don't know if there are limits on what she can do. We don't know where she's getting her information from. Now, she's initially meant to be a friend to the kids. She can explain to a child she doesn't understand condensation on the outside of a glass. So what she does is she looks it up on the internet and starts to explain the scientific nature of condensation. How does the water get outside of the glass? Megan also takes over some of the parenting roles. Her creator, Gemma, ends up giving us a voiceover that about 78% of a parent's time is spent giving repeated instruction. Katie, go flush the toilet. Katie, wash your hands. And it's repeated throughout. And Megan becomes more of that parenting role so that Gemma can focus on the more important things, and we see her sit down on the couch with her laptop and she turns on the TV. The important things. Now, what I find most interesting about this movie is that Megan is connected to the internet, and so are our kids. They're very connected to the internet, what with their TikTok dances. Now, for those of you who haven't seen the movie, this dance ends with Megan going across the hallway, and you can see that printer right next to her. You can also see the paper cutter. She ends up taking the arm off of that paper cutter and uses it to go on a murderous rampage. Where does she learn about murderous rampages and violence? She's meant for education. She's meant to be a new parent. There's a scene where she has to, in the woods, deal with a teenage bully. How do we learn to deal with a teenage bully? Where would we go for such things? My fear is that she went on maybe Reddit, maybe 4chan, learned how to do these terrible things and got bad advice. She ends up killing this teenage boy in the woods. She ends up killing a dog. She kills the neighbor because they're all threatening her primary user, 10-year-old girl Katie. Now, looking at this whole thing, I know what you're all thinking. But more importantly, to get to the real world stuff, stories keep coming out about deepfake porn. And as I mentioned earlier, the scariest thing for these people, these websites, is legislation and what's coming out. But this story right here came to us in February of 2023, this year. the victim, a streamer in this case, found that she could not sue the creators of this deepfake website, even though there was this pornographic material with her face on it and what we can assume looked similar to her body, and she wasn't the only one. There were several popular streamers on this website that had these deepfakes made of them, and there are only 4 states right now that have laws in place about deepfake pornography, California being one of them. So, with that said, we need legislation, and we need emotional intelligence backing it up as we design things for the future. We need to understand the ethical limits of what we can do, what we should do. And if no one's ever watched a horror movie before, just because we can doesn't mean we should. Thank you.
Thank you. And now for our final speaker, Adam Golub, Seeking Doubles, Doppelgangers, and the Digital Uncanny. Adam Golub is a professor of American Studies at Cal State Fullerton, where he teaches courses on popular culture, music, monsters, and childhood. He is co-editor of Monsters in the Classroom, Essays on Teaching What Scares Us, and the author of numerous essays on topics including fandom, true crime, zombies, and 1950s film and literature. He is currently writing a book on the cultural history of the doppelganger.
Thanks. Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our panel today, and thank you to the organizers of this terrific festival. I'm very happy to be here. Before I begin, want to just offer a brief content warning. One of the narratives I'm going to be talking about makes an allusion to self-harm and suicide. There's not a depiction of it, but an allusion to it. So my talk today is part of a larger project I'm working on, which is a cultural history of the doppelganger in the United States. As I like to tell my students, cultural history is the history of the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. And I'm really interested in the stories we tell about doppelgangers in literature and film, in folklore and ghost lore, in television and comics and popular culture and digital culture. And I'm really interested in the representation and the meaning of doppelgangers in different time periods, from the early 19th century to the present. And what I try to do is I try to read the doppelganger as a window onto 3 themes in American life. One, of course, is the issue of identity, right? The doppelganger is a symbol of a divided self, a fragmented self. So I'm interested in how the doppelganger connects to crises in identity, issues related to consciousness and psychology, and notions of the self in different time periods. The second theme is our relationship to technology, especially technologies of duplication. I think it's no surprise that the first cycle of doppelgangers to turn up in American culture was in the 1830s, the 1840s, the 1850s, the same time when photography is invented, the daguerreotype, right? Everyday Americans had the opportunity to essentially acquire a likeness of themselves. And we see these doppelganger cycles kind of, ebb and flow, surface and recede in connection to different innovations and technologies of duplication. There's another cycle with motion picture and early cinema. You also see this again in the 1950s with television, especially as it connects to the domestic and the family space, with technologies of cloning. And certainly today we have it with digital culture. The third theme that I think doppelgangers help us think through is the idea of the body politic, right? Thinking through the doppelganger as a metaphor for national identity, right? The union that does not cohere. Again, going back to that first cycle of doppelganger stories, they start to appear in the decades leading up to the Civil War, right? The fragmented body politics. So thinking about identity, technology, and also politics, national identity. Those are the three themes that I'm trying to kind of use the doppelganger to understand. Today, I'm going to be focusing on today. We're clearly living in a doppelganger moment right now. I think you could even make the argument that the doppelganger is our new zombie. It's just so pervasive in our popular culture for the past 10 years. We see so many iterations of the doppelganger in horror, in kind of multiverse superhero stories, right? We've got, from Stephen King's The Outsider, Jordan Peele's Us. I've got Another Me up here, Living with Yourself, the Paul Rudd comedy on Netflix. There's Annihilation, there's Duel. We're kind of flooded by doppelganger stories right now. And many of these stories adhere to the traditional role of the doppelganger in our storytelling, which is to serve as an agent of horror, right? Some kind of monstrous figure who usually turns up and wants to replace you, take over your life, as kind of a symbol of revolution. In Jordan Peele's Us, this is a story about an uprising, about a revolution, right? In the movie Duel, doppelgangers are essentially fighting each other. You're fighting your doppelganger to the death to see who can survive. Stephen King's The Outsider is about a killer doppelganger who assumes the shape of others. So a lot of our pop culture stories adhere to the longer arc of how we have imagined doppelgangers in the past. But there's a tension in this contemporary moment that I'm really interested in, which is this. At the same time that we're consuming these scary stories about doppelgangers again and again and again, we're seeing a new kind of doppelganger play, a playfulness, if you will, that's kind of emerging in our culture. Doppelganger fandom, a more lighthearted imagining of the doppelganger. We have opportunities now because of online tools for people to seek out their stranger twin, to find that other person somewhere out there in the world who looks just like you. Discover your doppelganger, right? We also see, there's a lot of memes related to celebrity doppelgangers, and one of the things I'll be talking about today on TikTok, this kind of idea, this meme on TikTok of imagining your own encounter with your doppelganger. In other words, there's a lot of kind of fan-like play surrounding doppelgangers. So there's this tension between the horror and the more lighthearted. And so I'm interested in trying to look at that and think that through today by looking at two case studies, although I may only have time to really focus in on one. Before I begin, I just want to do a couple clarifications, defining of my terms. We may know already that doppelganger comes from the German double goer or double walker. This is a figure that starts to appear in German literature in the late 1700s and European literature, and then kind of gravitates toward North America as well. It's an identity double, right? It's a second self, a non-biological twin. And over time, the doppelganger has taken on various manifestations in the popular culture. It can be a supernatural apparition that appears to us. It can also be the monster within, the Jekyll and Hyde idea, right? An alien body snatcher, Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It can also be a robot duplicate. Think Stepford Wives, right? An evil lookalike or an identity thief. Film noir is filled with doppelgangers and doubles. And also doubles from another dimension, the multiverse, right? This idea that there is a parallel you in another dimension. I have all of these folded into my investigation of the doppelganger, these various manifestations of it. I'm especially interested in how the doppelganger connects to this framework that I'm trying to kind of put together and think through of the digital uncanny. And I'm borrowing from some other scholars for this and trying to use this as a framework for thinking through the uncanny play that we're seeing with doppelgangers today. Michael Fuchs observes that in this contemporary digiculture, we constantly construct virtual doubles of ourselves through which we communicate with other people, right? The idea that we are online communicating through our doppelgangers with other people's doppelgangers. And then Chris Rivette-Biagioli, in a recent book called Digital Uncanny, says we leave traces of our interests, purchases, conversations, and personal feedback online uncannily, this information identifies us in minute details and feeds us back to ourselves as algorithmically generated narratives and images. And just thinking about these two particular types of phenomenon in our digital lives, I'm thinking through the digital age in the sense that it's created conditions that provoke uncanny sensations in us, right? It can be we can experience a lack of orientation when we see multiple versions of ourselves online, reflected back to us, represented online. And a particular unease, especially related to the digital reproduction of human beings. What should be familiar to us seems other, and to kind of paraphrase Sherry Turkle here, how can we be multiple and coherent at the same time? So thinking through this idea of the digital uncanny as it connects to the doppelgangers. One of the case studies that I want to talk about here is an analog horror web series that appeared in 2021, and it was created by an 18-year-old named Alex Kister. And what Alex did with this web series was kind of imagine it as, again, analog horror. It's supposed to have a VHS aesthetic, where it's kind of like found footage of phone calls and public service announcements and a training video for 911 operators. And he puts together this narrative that imagines a fictional county in Wisconsin called Mandela County. And essentially, this county in Wisconsin has been invaded by otherworldly beings that are called alternates. And what the alternates want is to replace you. And their strategy for replacing you is to try to induce you to kill yourself, to induce self-harm, so that they can then take your place. That's the premise of this imagined universe that is represented in the Mandela Catalog. Now, this is an expansive, spiraling story that goes on many episodes on the web. You can, kind of go into a rabbit hole on YouTube. I'm going to show you just a little clip here. That was the one that inspired the meme that I'm going to be talking about related to TikTok.
We are currently receiving countless reports of an unidentified hostile organism that we'll refer to as alternates. Until we have a complete understanding of the threat, it's important to stay home, lock all doors and windows, and have access to a loaded firearm or any ranged weapon at all times. You will know if an alternate exists solely based on their physical characteristics. If you see another person that looks identical to you, run away and hide. If you see a person that has a biologically impossible characteristic, run away and hide. If one manages to break into your home, refrain from any kind of communication or contact with the threat. These intelligent life forms utilize elements of psychological warfare to take advantage of their victims. While we heavily discourage any form of contact or communication with an alternate, we make exceptions for attempts at executing them yourself.
Okay, so, wow. Okay, so this is the horror web series that then clearly it's got some horrific elements to it, and this imagining of what the role of the doppelganger is. It's in line again with the idea that the doppelganger wants to replace you, wants to destroy you. Now, this in turn, there's a particular line of audio in here that has inspired thousands, tens of thousands of TikTok simulations, of TikTok memes. Hashtag Mandela Catalog. I just looked the other day, and even after making this PowerPoint, it's, I think, almost 1 billion views now. But I'll show you some examples from this, and I know I want to be mindful of time. Just a few examples of what people have done with the audio from this and what they've turned it into. And this is the playful side of doppelgangers that we're seeing.
If you see another person that looks identical to you, run away and hide. If you see another person that looks identical to you, run away and hide. If you see another person that looks identical to you, run away and hide. If you see another person that looks identical to you, run away and hide. If you see another person that looks identical to you, run away and hide.
Just one more.
If you see another person that looks identical to you, run away and hide. If you see another...
Okay. So as I said, there are many of these memes, many of these kind of versions to find online. And let me just try, I only have a minute here, so I'll just try to digest my analysis of what we just saw and offer a very quick conclusion to all of this. So if you see another person that looks identical to you, run away and hide. What's going on here, right? Well, certainly on one level, we see people remixing themselves into doppelganger lore, right? It's a kind of doppelganger cosplay where you're essentially performing your second self and imagining what would my second self look like? How would they behave? How would they be? I think this is also, one of my readings of this is as kind of an expression, a direct acknowledgement of this digital condition, this digital uncanny, that in the digital world we are multiple, and let's just kind of embrace this through this form of play. I'm going to insert myself twice into this digital medium and kind of just confront that rather than retreat from that. And then imagining your relationship to your second self. How do I relate to this version of me that's online? Am I terrified by what I see out there, right? Am I kind of, humored by this? Is this funny? Is this potentially a friend? And then, of course, what we're seeing here is a certain kind of rewriting of the cultural script. Some of them were twerking, they were dancing, this was more fun. This is not necessarily the horror of Mandela Catalog, which is really horrific. This is a revised, reimagined relationship to technology that we're seeing here. All right, I'm out of time, but I'll just want to kind of, end by saying I think a lot of these forms of digital play are a certain kind of intervention in this digital uncanny. And it's a way of trying to reflect on it, make sense of it, and try to kind of, as I have on this quote here, negotiate and navigate that gap between our social selves and our inner selves that has only widened, it seems, even further in the digital age. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. I think you'll agree with me. These have been 4 incredibly provocative and thoughtful papers. We only have about 21 minutes for questions, and I imagine there's many, so let's get to it. Just raise your hand and
if it turns out that one of you looks exactly like me, I'm going to freak out. Who's got a question?
Right up here in the front. Yeah.
Hi. My question is for Brandon. I really liked your essay. I thought about a lot of those things as a Black person, like watching Predator and watching Alien. And one of the things that I was thinking about when I was watching those, and I was so interested to hear the history of Geiger coming up with that, because it's one of those things that you look at and you're like, something right here. And just to hear that he literally built the costume like on a Black person is insane to me. But it makes so much sense. And so I wanted to ask you, like, how such a clearly, like, fetishistic act like that. Where I think about that a lot with Monsters and also Frankenstein, where it's like this kind of tension between there's this blackness, there's this dark heart of something that terrifies me and that I think is alien, but that you're also kind of drawn to, and that white culture loves to do so, not only like aesthetically, but also sexually, and that's so apparent in Geiger's work. And so I was wondering how that complicates the sort of relationship you can have to a creature like Alien, where it's like you see it more than like a realistic representation of yourself. You're seeing this white person's idea of what blackness is, and I was just wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Thank you so much for that, Fester. Can y'all hear me? Is that all right? Yeah, I think the racial history surrounding Alien is fascinating. I memean, the ship that they're aboard, the Nostromo's, named after Joseph Conrad novel, and even one of the recent adaptations of the game is Into the Heart of Darkness. And so it just seems like there's so many signifiers. Also, Geiger takes the form of Alien originally from his book, The Necronomicon, which is a direct reference to Lovecraft. And so in those regards, one of the things I was trying to work out in this piece and in the larger book, which is on intergalactic horror, is thinking about the sort of trivia knowledges that we know. So say, for instance, I didn't get to show the image, I forgot, but Predator is also played by Kevin Peter Hall, who's a black man as well. And these are people who are just not remembered for the contributions they've made to monster history. And so when you see that history, I think it opens up a new connection. The last thing I'll say on that, because I want to be mindful of time, is since I'm on a technology panel and my talk didn't really speak to that so much, one thing that's interesting about these two actors as well that makes the sort of anger and embrace of claiming Alien for me as a figure of negativity exciting is remembering that Kevin Peter Hall passed away from AIDS complications, and that young, and that Bolaji Badejo, a digital design artist from Nigeria, passed away from sickle cell young. And so in that regard, thinking of what it means, Afrofuturist dreams and ideas of going out to space and building this technology, while the medical services that should have been tending to issues that impact Black and queer peoples are not faced, as part of that history for me. And so there's something about locking onto a monster that, I could say so much while I close here, that for me allows such a sight of aggressive negativity, of thinking about what if I'm so vengeful and rageful that I would claim a monster that I know will destroy me, and that will not claim any sort of affinity with me despite how I see myself in it, right? What does it mean to be pushed to that point? Thank you.
Awesome. Other thoughts, questions? Yes, Mbalia.
I have a question for Adam. It's about the Mandela County. I'm wondering if you've thought about how race plays into the imagery within that little clip. I noticed that the original person is kind of a whitish image, and then the doppelganger is kind of a brownish image, and then you get white people doing twerking as they're doppelganging. So I'm just wondering, have you thought about the racialized aspect? Because the fear of the doppelganger seems to be the fear of the other.
That's a really good question, and that's a good point. I think, in Mandela catalog there, the depiction of this found video of this analog horror, there is a certain racialized element, definitely to the public service aspect that they're trying to present, the alternate as a racialized other, and then there's this inverse within kind of doppelganger play. There's a certain kind of formative blackness in the other version of yourself. Some of the twerking that you were talking about. So, historically, if you look at the figure of the doppelganger, a lot of our stories about doppelgangers are mostly about white men who are afraid of being replaced in their lives. That's why I think Jordan Peele's Us is so fascinating on so many levels. He's reimagined the doppelganger script in a whole different way. So yeah, I'm still working through a lot of the kind of racialized elements of the doppelganger. It's so centrally focused on white male fear of someone else just coming in and taking my place, right? And that is a big part of the stories that we're telling about it. And I think that is being doubled, if you will, in a lot of the online stuff that we're seeing.
Great, Kathy.
Thank you very much for all the papers. I'm going to follow up on the doppelganger. As I was listening, I was, of course, thinking of other traditions where you have this trope of being entered by the other and thinking, oh, you know, it's so different, the reaction, than in those kind of places where trance is something that you invite in. I was thinking how boring what we get fed back on the internet. Part of the algorithm, I think, oh, am I that boring and ugly and wrinkled and other things? So, I mean, it just struck me that must be something about the Western identity of being unchangeable from birth until death, that it contrasts with the way that the doppelganger is used, say, within Indonesian wayang, or the idea that you should have a body there, and with guidance, invite another entity or spirit, or, you know, both negative and positive to play out within your community so it doesn't harm you on the outside. And there must be something about that enculturation of identity that makes the doppelganger so scary to us and boring, as opposed to relief and something beautiful and performative to do within art, so it doesn't hurt us in the everyday. But
well, no, I think that's a really good point, and certainly, you know, a subset of the doppelganger stories has always been this notion of the better self doppelganger that turns up as a better version of us, and maybe they would do a better job at living my life than I would, you know, and so what do we do in that situation, and why is that's threatening to me in itself? But no, I think it's an excellent point that the doppelganger in general is kind of raising this question of why can't we kind of coexist with multiple versions of ourselves that might be complementary rather than threatening in some kind of way? And maybe individually, if we're able to think through some of that stuff. But what you're bringing up, which is really important too, is the spiritual side of this. I think maybe that's sometimes lost in our pop culture stories. Oh, sure.
Okay, so I hand over here.
This question is for Yeshing. In talking about, you didn't get to spend much time actually talking about the giant woman at the end of the world, and I was wondering if she functions solely as a cipher for people to project their own sublime reasoning into, or if the portrayal actually is there warmth? Is this a protector? Is this a threat? Is she terrifying?
The answer is yes to all of that. I think she is basically, so how my dissertation is going to end, spoiler, is to prove that the world is not ending, but rather is really a kind of like what these kind of narratives sort of like reach the breaking point is our understanding, you know, especially the kind of like the masculine as patriarchal understanding of identity, right? There is, because, I mean, I think there's a lot of like, because the process of self has always been this process of distillation, right? Leaving the other behind, leaving the undesirable behind. Then the other sort of like becomes this monster figure. So when you're looking at the giant woman, you're not really looking at her, you're really thinking about who is looking at her. In that case, it's, the kind of like the traditional sublime is that you always have a male figure being positioned in front of the fog, in front of the wave, in front of the giant monster. It's about him, it's never about her. She doesn't exist. So, and I think how my kind of dissertation ends is sort of looking at what about other ways of looking at it? What if you identify with the monster? And I think, kind of Brandon's talk as well, it's like, what if you find the self in the other? Like, what if you find the alien, you find the monstrosity to be something compelling for you? Or, in the case, like, what if you are the shapeshifter in that case, right? So I think is really about, to take that more of a culturally, right? Then you understand that, how we understand civilization, how we understand subjectivity, like a post-war or post-colonial discourse, it still revolves around masculinity, the construction of it. So that's kind of like the point, is that yes, she is a very big category that encompasses everything, but she also doesn't exist. She's the leftover of the distillation process of the self. But yeah, thank you for the question.
Thanks, Yasheng. Okay, Katya, you're after Scott.
Hi, thank you, everybody. That was a really interesting panel. Just a quick couple comments. Maybe there's an interesting kind of theme for the whole conference of identifying and sympathizing with the monster, and I like that's an interesting and kind of compelling kind of shift, I think, in thinking about these things. Brandon, I really like your talk as well, and I also found myself sympathetic with the alien in that this creature has been so exploited through even just the film arch. Like you think of Prometheus as created in terms of a weapon of mass destruction and chained and reproduced, all for this kind of sport or things. So I really enjoyed your talk in terms of that and the racial aspect of it as well. But I had a question for Adam in terms of the doppelganger thing, and I was wondering if kind of like the racial question, have you considered the way those online doppelganger trends play into kind of the darker elements of the web, like 4chan and things, in terms of like the great replacement theory that is perpetuated by what's that crazy group? Anon and all those kind of people. And is that part of your thinking or part of your research?
I think this is all kind of the newest portion of where I'm headed, because I've been doing so much of the historical groundwork, and now I'm dipping my toes in the contemporary moment. But I think you're absolutely right that there's some very uncomfortable parallels there. Naomi Klein's new book is called Doppelganger, and she actually does a lot of this kind of parallel investigation into the mirror world, where sometimes our politics, what's up seems down, and there's just once you start getting to sometimes the far left and the far right, they're not that far apart. And so I think you're getting me to kind of start connecting some of that bigger context here to this scary idea of the replacement who's here to essentially eliminate you. And that's definitely, I think, with the body politic theme that I'm interested in, that's going to be a 21st century rising theme when it comes to doppelganger. So thank you for that.
Yeah, just to touch on the concept of the AI as doppelganger for a second. I think what's going on with AI art is fascinating right now. So much of what we see is very uncanny. Disney just released, I think it was a new Bring It On movie, and in one of the scenes, there's a shot of the bleachers. We see real human actors in the front row, and then the back is filled with AI audience members. And the motions, the movements are so inhuman, and a lot of the art the early art that we're getting now has extra rows of teeth, extra fingers on the hands. It's not right, but what scares me about it is that it's getting better, and the AI is learning, and it's a lot of what we have right now is based on theft from other artists, and it's not properly attributed. And that's part of what's coming out now is the upcoming legislation about that stuff is going to be fascinating to watch. But I think the other part of it that's interesting is that when it comes to this legislation, it's more about protecting the economic impact of this stuff than it is about protecting the people involved.
Thank you all for your really interesting works. I'm going to stay on the doppelganger theme for a moment. Adam, I know the definition of the doppelganger refers to non-twins, but have you thought in terms of the conjoined twin and the fear of shared identity and the inability to assign privilege, responsibility, blame of the simultaneous identity? Because there's a lot of work done, representations of conjoined twins that go down this path, and I'm interested in the way that the doppelganger is not just the fear of a matching individual, but becoming the same person.
That is such an excellent point. I'm so glad you brought that up. I'm actually in the middle of working on a section now about Chang and Eng, the so-called Siamese twins, the co-joined twins that were celebrities in the 19th century, contemporaneous with the rise of photography and the kind of first cycle of doppelganger stories. And it's clear that how we try to think through conjoined twins and that kind of dissonance when it comes to identity and agency, that informs a lot of our representation of doppelgangers and our kind of depiction of doppelgangers. The conjoined twins are unquestionably part of the cultural roots, right? The cultural history of doppelgangers. And I think that then brings in questions about body and disability and questions about othering, within unity. There's just a lot going on there, not to mention the fact that Chang and Eng are also Asian, right? And so there's a lot to think through with that. But you're absolutely right that is one of the roots of the doppelganger lore comes from, I think, our uncanny encounter with conjoined twins and how we try to make sense of that. Thank you.
Thanks. I think we have one more.
Hi, thanks. This can kind of speak to all of your talks, which I very much loved. I sort of work on social reproduction sort of through a feminist, anti-racist lens, and sort of thinking about, how you can think about it with like the Verhoeven movie Starship Troopers, where we're not quite in a post-feminist or post-racial world, but you can see a world where on the surface it looks, equal, but then the bugs are sort of gender and race is displaced onto bugs who are then, violated with a big stick or this kind of thing. And I'm just kind of wondering how, I thought all of your talks spoke beautifully to how, this displacement of gender and race onto sort of monsters or technology sort of reflect on how our moment of capitalism sort of helps us rethink how gender and race works, and we're not in a post-racial or post-feminist moment, but it's more complicated to see how these kinds of oppression works, specifically through a sort of a capitalist logic. So I'm just wondering if any of you have thoughts on how your projects speak to that. I saw some work, spoke pretty overtly to that.
Thank you for that question. I say with Ripley in Aliens, she's such a fascinating character for that because there's a horror anthology called Slash Her, which is thinking about the importance of representing women killers. And she's one of the figures championed as a final girl. And one of the things that people look at with regard to Ripley, though, is Sigourney Weaver herself was staunchly against guns, say. And so she really fought not to shoot those aliens. In fact, an interesting line, she actually really wanted to have sex with the alien. And so it's really interesting some of the slips, I think, that happen sometimes in thinking of in that displacement, like even the way Alien's body gets thought of. Alien is often regarded as a black phallic threat because its head was very explicitly meant to signify a penis. They would refer to it as such on set. But it also has a lot of female genitalia throughout its life cycle. Interestingly, a thing I think is consistently overlooked in the Alien's life cycle too is the facehugger stage was very intentionally made to emulate not black skin but white people's skin. And what does it mean to locate in earlier, and there's also some female genitalia that's located within that species. But I think in this regard, the monster, this is something Cassia was helping me think about yesterday, has so many different codes. And it's interesting to see what we read and don't read into those characters. And I think Ripley, there's a really wonderful book for folks who are interested called The Meanings of Ripley. And it's in navigating exactly what it means to seek identification, affirmation through her character in light of the vexed place her character has in relation to being subject to the male gaze, these sorts of things. I feel there's one last point I want to make. Will it come back to me? Maybe I'll just conclude there. Last point. There's a really great collection, too, called Women Who Kill, which is thinking about post-feminist discourse and thinking about what it means to celebrate Ripley was often called fembo, as being just a female version of Rambo. And so there's lots of skepticism of what it means to try and think about, we can substitute this one character, which was not supposed to be a woman, but was then thrown in at the last minute, and find identification through something that wasn't meant to code with you. I'll conclude there, but thank you.
Thanks, everybody, so much. I want to thank Michael Foster for being our moderator and this wonderful panel. Thank you so much. Big round of applause for this panel.